many of you, I hope most of you, have been on this journey with us as we've begun reading through the Bible together, chronological order from beginning to the end. Now, I know for some of you, this may be new to you, and maybe today's the first time you're hearing about it, and you're like, well, that's a lot of catching up. I just don't think I can pull that off. Start where you are today and move forward, because everything we're doing this year, all the messages that we preach will have been from a reading that you had this current week. Also, our website, onesinglestory.com, is a place to go to get the daily reading plan. It's also where our daily podcasts are available for you to view. And we're getting a tremendous amount of feedback from those podcasts, both from folks inside the church and outside the church. And I'm grateful for that. So I hope that you continue this journey with us. Today we will conclude our time in the book of Job, and as we move on through the scripture. And I'll tell you, I had this comment multiple times this week. People have posed questions to me. I get them throughout the week as we're reading together. They want to know this or that. And this has been a typical theme. They said, I'll be glad when we get out of the book of Job. It's just a reality of it. And listen, some books in the Bible are easier to read than others. Some of them have more colorful characters or themes than others, but we can learn from each and every book of the Bible, and every story in the Bible, and every verse in the Bible is there for a reason. As you have read through, hopefully, the book of Job by now, we have discovered that Job was the Bible describes him this way: he was perfect or complete. He was a just, upright man who avoided evil at all costs. We know that he was healthy, he was wealthy, and he was wise. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, but we also know there came a time when Satan was allowed into the presence of God, and that's a whole nother issue, the divine council, where he appeared to God. God had a conversation with him, and it was God's idea for him to consider Job. You remember that? That's a very important point. And it was God who allowed Satan to affect and to touch Job's life, that he lost his fortune, he lost his family, he eventually lost his health, but he did not lose his faith. One of the common themes throughout the book of Job that you will find, even though Satan had this conversation, he got permission, that everything that negatively, that we would label negatively impacted and affected Job's life, came only by the permission of God himself. Thank you. I think that's why we're not getting any feedback right now, because my wife said that's scary. But it is also comforting to know that nothing touches your life or my life unless it first has God's permission. Now, I did not say that he causes it or creates it. I said, but he allows it, and he ultimately works good in and through it for his glory and for our growth and maturity. Now, throughout the book of Job, in fact, the bulk of the chapters 4 through 37 are conversations that Job's friends are having with him. Most of it is they are making accusations to him. Rather than coming and praying for him, they say things like, you're in this situation because you've got secret sin in your life. How would you like it if this week, and many of you did at various times, reached out to me this week to share prayer requests, and what if I said to you, right to start with, you either call me or text me, and you asked for prayer in some specific area, and I said, what secret sin are you hiding? Prayer requests would dry up real quick, wouldn't they? And they make these accusations, and they make an assumption. Job had all this going for him in his life. Now all of these bad things are happening. Therefore, it must be Job's fault, and he must have sinned. He must be hiding something from God. He's not confessed. Therefore, we need to help him discover what it is so he can get his problem fixed. Not every problem and situation and traumatic experience that comes our way has anything to do with what we did or said or didn't do or say, although some of it does. But again, it has to be filtered through the permission of God. Now, when we get to chapter 38, where we are in Job today, through 41, we find that God speaks. God speaks. He's going to have a literal conversation with Job. We'll see in just a minute that when he opens this conversation, one of the first things he asked Job, he said, who is this that is speaking all of these ignorant, foolish things? Okay, I need to get you into the message today and participate, okay? Let me ask this question right at the beginning. How many of you, along with me, will acknowledge that at some point in time, and probably not so long ago, have said some foolish, silly, insignificant things that you wish you hadn't said? I've got 4 honest people in the back. Okay, they're now, the Spirit's moving forward. And I'm glad it made its way to the left-hand side before it left. And so God is going to pose this question to Job, and then he's going to really challenge him. But I got to thinking about questions that we ask, as Job had asked questions of God, that have no real significance or meaning to life, that we spend a lot of time on sometimes. And I just jotted down a few of them, and then we're going to get into the message. But why is it called, here's a question, why is it called beauty sleep when you wake up looking like a hot mess? Why do they call them chilies when peppers are hot? Why is it called jumbo shrimp? How about plastic, we use this term in our house sometimes, plastic silverware. You see where I'm going here? Or why do we use the term sometimes working vacation or unbiased opinion? You'll hear that a lot. Let me help you from a church perspective. Some of the questions that get asked from time to time that really you need to know the answer to ahead of time, so you don't necessarily actually ask them. One is, and for many of you, you may not understand and know the culture of Open Door Church, but there's no need for you to ask the question, do we have fundraisers here? Because the answer is astounding, no, we do not. Now listen, this is no slant or slam on anybody else who does, or if you come from that culture, or for our friends who may be watching where you do. But at Open Door, we do not do fundraisers. We do not sell anything. We believe in the fact that God's people have been given the resources necessary to fund His work. And if you're obedient, then there'll be enough to go around to accomplish what He wants to accomplish. So no need to ask me the question moving forward. Here's another question that really you don't need to ask anybody. And believe it or not, from time to time I get these posed in different forms. Should I serve? Should I give? I'm telling you, these are questions that have been asked. Should I pray? Should I read and study the Bible on my own? The answer to all of those is yes. And here's one more, and then we gotta jump right into our passage today. And please take this in the context for which it is meant. I have fielded this question for 2 days now. Are we going to have church if there's a single snowflake forecasted the previous 3 days or 3 days after church? Listen, I get it. I understand. We have had times when we've had to cancel church. And when that happens, we do our best to let you know. But there are some things that we ask questions about that we really don't need to waste our time on or even insult God or other people with the questions. Go with me to Job chapter 38. We'll begin at verse 1. Says, question, why did I wear that? Good answer. Willie said, ask the wife. Job 38, beginning at verse 1. Said, then the Lord answered Job. Now, on the front end, that would seem like a wonderful, exciting thing to have God to audibly respond to us, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Yeah, because if I ask you, would you really love to hear God speak to you today in a way so clearly and crisp that you could understand and know unequivocally that it was God, all of us would raise our hands. But on this occasion, when the Lord answers Job, it is not so pleasant at the beginning of the conversation. It says, the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, from the storm conditions, the things that were overwhelming him, the situation that was so intimidating. We've already recapped many of the things that he was struggling with, that he was going through. But I did make a note here that storms are great places and times and occasions for us to hear God speak. I can look back over my life and tell you without hesitation that the times that I heard God speak the clearest and the seasons of growth and development and maturity in my life absolutely came through the storm seasons of my life that I was walking through. And so the Lord answers him from the whirlwind, and he says to Job, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? How would you like God to speak to you today? And that's the first thing he says to you. Who are you speaking to me with such ignorant words? Most of us would look around and say, who are you talking to? Who is it? And then God says to him, brace yourself like a man. In other words, prepare for impact, because I'm getting ready to speak some things to you that you weren't prepared for. He says, I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. There's no pleading the fifth. There's no right to remain silent. God said, you've had a lot of questions. You've wanted to have answers to a lot of things. He says, I'm getting ready to respond to you, but it's going to be in the form of questions back to you, and you don't have a choice. You're going to have to answer them to me. Look at verse 4. He's going to ask him some questions about things that Job did not do or have anything to do with. He said, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Meaning at creation. He's speaking to Job. Tell me if you know so much. Who determined its dimensions and stretched out the survey line? What supports its foundations, and who laid its cornerstone? As the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. Psalms 148 has a great reference there where the angels rejoiced at creation as it unfolded. Verse 8, he continues. Who kept the sea inside its boundaries as it burst from the womb? And as I clothed it with clouds, that's the sky above, and wrapped it in thick darkness, speaking of the depths of the sea itself. Found it interesting this week to discover that at least what we know right now, and much of the oceans have been unmapped, undiscovered, unexplored, but there are depths of the sea that exceed 7 miles in depth. Did you hear what I said? 7 miles deep. And you don't even have to go half that distance before no light longer filters through, and everything is in complete and utter darkness. And the Lord asked him about this. Verse 10, he said, for I locked it behind barred gates, speaking of the ocean, limiting its shores. I said, this far and no farther will you come. Here your proud waves must stop. The first thing that God addresses Job, and I think it would be helpful to us when all of a sudden we appoint ourselves as the person who knows everything about everything and about everybody and feel the compulsion to be able to give advice on everything to everybody all the time is to stop and ponder these simple questions that God asked Job. Where were you when the earth was created to begin with, and do you know how to control any of it? Do you see the perspective? That God's saying, wait a minute, you're questioning me and you want me to come down to your level? He said, were you even a part of this creation process? And obviously the answer is no. And now he's going to ask him a series of questions about things that he cannot do. He says, verse 12, have you ever commanded the morning to appear and caused the dawn to rise in the east? I'm almost scared to ask this question, but I'm going to. Has anybody in here ever said, you know what, I'm tired of it being dark, so I'm going to make the sun come up? I'm ready for daylight. Got a lot I need to do. The obvious answer is no. He says, have you made daylight spread to the ends of the earth to bring an end to the night's wickedness? As the light approaches, the earth takes shape like clay pressed beneath a seal. Literally, you begin to see its form and its shape that has been created. He said, and it's robed in brilliant colors. Do you understand that without light, there isn't color? It's not a trick question. You can't see, and colors can't be exhibited without light being exposed on and to them. And he asked Job, he said, can you make the sun come up whenever you want it to? And when it does come up, can you make it shine on the entire earth? And when it does come up and shine on the entire earth, can you point out all the earth's features, the water, the valleys, the hills, the mountains, the trees, and all the things that we see? And listen, this is a challenge for me, and I want to make this a challenge to you, to stop taking every day for granted the fact that the sun comes up and reveals the beauty of God's creation. Because if we started our day with just that one simple perspective, all of a sudden we would be humbled and respect and honor and worship God, I'm convinced, far greater than we do. And it would cause us to be a lot less arrogant toward other people, knowing that we know so little. He says, verse 15, the light disturbs the wicked and stops the arm that is raised in violence. I never paid attention to this passage before like I have this week to understand that God in his sovereignty and magnificence, not only does he make the sun to shine to give us light and to bring us warmth in the daytime, but that it puts an end to so much of what would be wickedness. Can you imagine if the earth was shrouded in darkness 24/7, how much worse things would be? Have you ever stopped to think about that? That we are spared much evil and wickedness simply because God chooses for the sun to rise every day. And he's asking Job, he said, can you do that? Have you done that? Do you have anything to do with that? Look at verse 16. Have you explored the springs from which the seas come? Have you explored their depths? Tell me about it if you know. And obviously he can't respond to that because Job has no understanding. He didn't even know as much about those things as we know now, and we know very little in comparison. Verse 17. He's going to ask some questions that Job nor you and I can answer. He said, do you know where the gates of death are located? Think about that question. We have a concept of what physical death is, but do we really understand and know the process from the last heartbeat, from the last breath, from there into eternity, even as a believer, into the presence of God? He said, do you know where the gates of death are located? Have you seen the gates of utter gloom? Do you realize the extent of the earth? Where does light come from and where does it go? Can you teach each or take each to its home? Do you know how to get there? But of course, and listen, I love God's response here, because there is a sense of, and some of you are going to have trouble with this, there's a sense of sarcasm in God's answer to Job. Don't tell me God was sarcastic. I'm telling you, he was. I'm waiting for some of you to process because some of you are really struggling right now. Listen to his response. After he listed all these questions, he said, but of course you know all this, for you were born before it was all created, and you're so very experienced. You see God's response to him? He said, you make the assumption, you take the position that you know enough that you're going to question me. He said, and I just laid out a whole list of things you had nothing to do, that you can't control, you have no authority over. He said, but yet you know everything, don't you? Not long ago, I was with my grandson, and we were talking about various things, and I absolutely try to be very intentional about looking. Everything for me is a teachable moment and opportunity. I don't care what the issue is. He's currently 7 years old, and this is what I'm finding more and more. I don't care if it's talking about something in creation. I don't care if it's talking about relationships. I don't care if it's talking about money. I don't care if it's talking about games. Doesn't make any difference now that, and I say, let me tell you something. Let Pa Jay teach you something right quick. He'll say, I know. I said, no, there's a lot you don't. Let me help you understand. I already know. I said, what you don't know is what's getting ready to happen to you. Listen, we, like my grandson, never need to be in the position where we think we already know everything. Because listen, here's the truth of the matter. We don't even know everything about ourselves. Much less about other people. Much less about God himself. Now, he has given us his word so that we can learn about him. And that's one of the beautiful things that we're doing as a church as we read through the Bible together every day and working our way through the entire Bible, is that you and I are going to know so much more about the nature and the character of God next week than we did last week, next month, right on through the year than we ever did before. And isn't that a great thing? So he asked him those questions, and he says in verse 22, have you visited the storehouses of the snow or seen the storehouses of hail? Meaning, is there a place where snow is reserved and kept? Is there a place where hail and hailstones are kept? And if there's such a thing as a storehouse, Job, do you know where it's at? Do you even know how it's made? Can you send any of it? And then God tells him in verse 23, he says, I have reserved them, talking about these elements, as weapons for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war. God's saying to Job, not only do I control the earth and its elements, but I use them to facilitate my plan and my purpose. Think about that. The next time you have an outing plan and it rains 3 inches, that God has a plan and a purpose, even though you and I may never see it or understand it. The next time it is below 30 degrees and forecast of a possibility of a snowflake or two, understand God has a plan and a purpose that you and I may never see or understand. He uses it to his glory and honor. And I did a little research here about verse 23 where he says, I've reserved them, speaking of the elements, as weapons for the time of trouble and the day of battle and war. All the way back to Exodus chapter 9, we see that one of the judgments sent on Egypt when the Israelites were wanting to be set free was fire and hail rained down on Egypt as judgment. Who sent the fire mixed with the hail as judgment on the earth? God did. Joshua chapter 10 is an interesting story. Says where the Lord cast hailstones down on Israel's enemies. They were in conflict in battle. And it says that more were killed by the hailstorms, more soldiers perished of the enemy camp than the ones that died at the swords of the Israeli soldiers. Who's in charge of the earth and its elements? God is. In Revelation, there's at least 3 references, chapter 8, chapter 11, and chapter 16, where hailstorms will be poured out on the earth. In Revelation 16, it says hailstones that exceed 100 pounds in weight will fall on the earth as part of the judgment during the tribulation period. Listen, I'm not trying to redirect our focus away from that, but what I want you to understand is that God and God alone is sovereign. He controls everything. And here's what I've come to the conclusion. I think I already knew this and understood it, but after my accident 16 months ago, I came to the conclusion I am in control of absolutely nothing. Nothing. And when we come to that point where we understand we're in control of nothing, it is much easier for us to surrender to God and say, it's all dependent on you. What do you want me to do, and how can I play a part in this plan and purpose that you have? Job 38, verse 32. 38 and 32. He continues with his line of questioning to Job. He said, can you direct the constellation or the groups of stars through the seasons? And I love this one, or guide the bear with her cubs. You understand even God is in charge of the animal kingdom? You know, and we look at animals and they migrate and how they process and provide for their young and gather the food. And I think we get in this habit of we just take things for granted. Would you and I please stop and slow down, and every time we see an animal, understand that God not only created them, but it is also God that provides for them everything that they need. He says, do you know the laws of the universe? Can you use them to regulate the earth? Can you shout to the clouds and make it rain? I know some farmers who would have loved to have had that ability on occasions, right? But we don't. He said, can you make lightning appear and cause it to strike as you direct? And can I tell you, I'm one of the primary reasons he didn't allow this. And you say, what did you mean by that? We can talk about that after the service. He said, who gives intuition to the heart? Your ability and my ability, the intuition that we have, the wisdom or the knowledge that we have without proof or evidence or without even discussing something. You ever been in a situation where all of a sudden something, boom, there it was, and you just knew how to respond, or knew you were like, I need to avoid that, or I need to go in a different direction, or I need to jump right in. Do you know what I'm talking about? Intuition. Do you understand that that comes directly from God? We don't have the ability to give that to ourselves or give it to other people. And he says not only intuition to the heart, the feelings and emotions, he said an instinct to the mind. If you have anywhere near a reasonable mind today to think on any level, do you understand that was given to you by God? Now, we can enhance the gifts that God has given to us, and we should. That would be a good example. I've known people that have never gone to school, and their ability to think and process and engineer far superseded people who had multiple degrees because it was a gift from God. You with me? But listen, I'm afraid that too often we as God's people use that as an excuse. This is what God's given me. That's the end of it. And so I don't need to do anything else with it. You're absolutely wrong. A couple examples. If you are a musician, God has given you the ability to play music. It is your responsibility to learn more, to be more proficient, and to practice, and to pray, and to use the best equipment that you can get your hands on so that you are giving back to Him your very best. Does that make sense? If you have a rational mind, you have a sharp mind, the more education that you can get, whether it's in school, high school, college, trade skills, whatever it is, you owe it not only to yourself and the people around you, but you owe it to God to maximize what He has already given to you. It says it is God who gives intuition to the heart, instinct to the mind. Job 39:13. I could not get by without putting this passage in here because it has just captured my thought process for weeks. It says, the ostrich flaps her wings grandly. It's a big bird, right? And have you ever seen one, and I mean just stand there and proud and just flop their wings, and you're just like, that is the greatest show on earth, and that is the greatest bird on earth, and she thinks and believes she's the greatest thing on earth. Now, I know some people who think the same thing about themselves. Don't look at anybody right now. But then he goes on to say, but they are no match for the feathers of the stork. One has black feathers with white tips. One has white feathers with black tips. But he's talking about something more deep here, because the stork is known as a bird of parental love. In fact, growing up, you probably saw the stories about the stork bringing the baby. You with me? Well, even Eastern cultures, even back in the day, had high regards for the stork. And he literally saying one's not better than the other, and even though one stands bigger than the rest and flaps his wings grandly, says she, speaking of the ostrich, lays her eggs on top of the earth, letting them be warmed in the dust. She doesn't worry that a foot might crush them or a wild animal might destroy them. Now she's proud, she's big, she's flapping her wings, getting a lot of attention. She's harsh toward her young, as if they were not her own. She doesn't care if they die, verse 16. Look at verse 17. For God has deprived her of wisdom. He has given her no understanding. Whatever understanding, whatever wisdom, whatever abilities that you and I have, we need to understand they have all been given to us by God for His glory. He says, but whenever she jumps up to run, she passes the swiftest horse with its rider. She's not only big and large and has those feathers, she loves to stand proudly and flap them. When she takes off, she can outrun a horse out of the gate. But in this particular area, even caring for her own young, she lays her nest right on the ground where predators can get to her. Other birds, things can step on them and crush them. It says God has deprived her of wisdom and understanding. And listen, here's what I want you to understand. The book of James tells us if we lack wisdom in any area of our life, to ask God, He will give it to us freely and generously. Sometimes I'm convinced that our problem and issue is like the ostrich. We're content for everybody to see us, flap our wings, as it were, and draw a lot of attention and impress people with the things that we can do. And when the things that are really important, the care of relationships, we're careless with and devoid of understanding and wisdom and judgment. And listen, I don't care if it's in the area of relationships, in the area of finances, health issues. God said, if you need wisdom, I have it. I'll be glad to share it with you. Part of the problem comes in when we pray. If we do actually pray and ask for that in a particular area of our life, God uses other people to help facilitate that wisdom, and we refuse to humble ourselves enough to get the help we need. The Holy Spirit of God's trying to speak to some hard hearts right now and tell you He's got an answer to your problem, but you're going to have to humble yourself and seek some help. Going on about business as you've always done, being seen and heard and pretending nothing is needed in your life is not the way to get the answer or the wisdom to what you need. Look at Job 40, verse 1. The Lord said to Job, do you still want to argue with the Almighty? You are God's critic, but do you have the answers? Here's Job's response. Job replied back to the Lord, I am nothing. How could I ever find the answers? I have practiced this next line this week, and I've had to be very intentional when the opportunities came. He said, I will cover my mouth with my hand. Because I have said too much already. I have nothing more to say. One of the absolute quickest ways for us to prove that we are lacking in wisdom is the refusal or the inability sometimes to close our mouth. I didn't expect nobody to say amen. And they did. It's okay. Because usually, like Job, and I'm telling you, I am in this category. I usually can say, I have said too much already. One of the great aspects of wisdom that God imparts to us is the discipline sometimes to say nothing. And I know what you're struggling with right now. You said, but they were wrong. And even better, I was right. Listen, conflict is inevitable. Combat is optional. Conflict is inevitable. Combat is optional. That second part is up to you. How we respond to God, how we respond to other people and to situations, absolutely is a great measurement of our level of wisdom and our maturity in our walk with God. 42 verse 1, we're done. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything, and no one can stop you. Isn't it great that we know and serve the God who can do anything and nobody or nothing can stop him? Isn't that good? We ought to be excited about that. We ought to sit up in our seats a little higher. We ought to have a smile on our face. We ought to get a little bit excited that that's the God we claim to serve. He says, but you ask, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorance? I love Job's humility and honesty here. He said, it is I. It's me. He didn't say, go back a few chapters in the book and you remember my wife. He said, it is I. And I was talking about things I knew nothing about. Things far too wonderful for me. You said, listen, and I will speak. I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. Verse 5, this last verse. Throughout this entire process in the book of Job and all that he had going for him, and anybody would have wanted to be in his situation until the calamity, the struggle, the pain, the suffering, the loss came his way. And then to make matters worse, when his friends kept giving this bad advice and challenging him, making these accusations, and he finally hears back from God, and he's gone through this prolonged process. He says, verse 5, I had only heard about you before. Do you remember what the scripture said at the very beginning about Job? He was upright. He was just. He was honest. He was complete. He feared God. He worshiped God. He did everything in his power to stay away from evil. And yet he makes this declaration, I had only heard about you before. Let me try to help us understand. He said, I did the right things. I even went to church on a regular basis and surrounded myself with good Christian people. I heard about you before, but now I have seen you with my own eyes. There is an absolute, total difference between hearing about and knowing about God and experiencing Him for yourself. And here's what I want to encourage you with today. You, like Job, may be going through a season of storm, suffering, loss, false accusations, people getting in your business that got no business in your business, and you are struggling with one or a multitude of things. It may be health issues. Listen, here's what I'm telling you. If you, like Job, will stay the course and say, my heart is open and it's honest before you, and I surrender myself to you, and I understand you're God. I don't understand this. I don't like it. I don't want it, but I'm going to be faithful to you. I'm telling you, God will turn your situation around eventually. And when you come out the other side, when you come out the other side, because you will, your circumstance will change. You can say, I have seen Him with my own eyes. I've heard Him with my own ears. I know Him on a personal level greater than I ever did when this thing began. If I ask how many of you would like an appointment with God today, a genuine appointment, just you and Him to converse and talk, I'm convinced we would raise our hand and we would be sincere. Here's what I'm telling you, we learned through this book of Job. It is the hard times. It's the broken seasons. It's the times when people you loved and trusted the most betrayed you. It's when everything you've worked for and built is now gone and it's out of your control. It is when people that don't know your business should be out of your business, get in your business, and want to tell everybody else, and it's not even true, and you can't defend it or come to your own rescue. I'm telling you, it's in those times and seasons that God will reveal Himself to you and speak to you. And like Job, you'll say, I'd only heard about Him and known about Him before, but I know Him on a personal level right now. Listen, if we understood that concept, we would say, God, I still don't like it. I still didn't sign up for this, but I'm excited about what you're going to do, revealing yourself through this storm, because you're bringing me through, and I'm going to know you greater than I've ever known you before.